My name is Major General Emma Johnson, United States Marine Corps. And on the day my father married his second wife in front of 100 people at the American Legion Jamal in Fredericksburg, Virginia, I heard him point at me and say, "She's nothing but a bastard." I wish I could tell you that after 54 years of living wearing this uniform and carrying 2 stars on my collar, those words rolled right off me. But they didn't. They landed sharp and they stayed. I stood there holding a paper up of coffee that tasted like burnt grounds and styrofoam, surrounded by folding chairs and plastic tablecloths. The DJ had been spinning some old Conway Twitty, and the crowd was loose from cheap wine and open bar Budweisers. Then Dad raised his glass for a toast. He didn't lift me up in it. He shoved me down. You could feel the room go quiet, forks scraped to a stop against paper plates. Aunt June gasped and muttered, "How for God's sake?" Somebody chuckled, thinking maybe it was a joke, but it wasn't. He meant it. He leaned into it. He said it like a man setting the record straight. He turned, then puffed out his chest and draped an arm around Ashley, the daughter of his new wife, Catherine. She was 26 hair, sprayed high pink dress too tight for the occasion, and a little smirk on her lips. This, Dad said, "This my real daughter. This is the one who carries my name right." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. That's never been my way. The court taught me discipline, but I'd been practicing it long before I signed those enlistment papers back in Leach, Texas. I just set my coffee down and told the bartender, a kid in a bow tie vest, "Water's fine. Thanks." I stepped outside into the parking lot. The sun was going down, heat rising off the asphalt, cicadas buzzing from the trees. I leaned against my car, a dull gray Chevy Malibu, and breathed deep. The smell of cut grass mixed with cigarette smoke from a couple of old vets lingering near the door. They looked at me, then looked away. Folks never know what to do in moments like that. Inside, laughter picked back up. Somebody cranked the music again. I could picture Dad dancing stiff-legged with Catherine, the new bride. I could picture Ashley soaking up the compliments, telling anyone who'd listen that she was a Marine too stationed at Quantico. She wasn't lying. She just didn't tell them the rest. That she worked in admin and that her name had already crossed my desk on a report about falsified travel receipts. But that wasn't for now. Right then, all I could hear were Dad's words echoing louder than the cicadas. "She's nothing but a bastard. I'm a woman who buried friends in Arlington. I'm a woman who stood watch through sandstorms, who wrote letters to mothers when their sons didn't come home. And yet, in that hall in front of neighbors and cousins and church ladies, my father took every ounce of dignity I had earned and tried to reduce it to the circumstances of my birth. The thing about being humiliated isn't just the words. It's the way they hang in the air. The way people's eyes avoid yours. The way they decide whether to clap or to stay quiet. That silence lies heavier than the insult. I thought about leaving. I thought about getting on I-95 and driving back to Stafford, putting this night behind me. I thought about my uniform bag, still in the trunk from the ceremony I'd attended earlier that morning at Quantico. Blue dress, polished shoes, ribbons I'd never once bragged about. 2 silver stars I had earned the slow way year after year. And I thought about Mom, long gone now, who used to tell me, "Laura, you don't have to fight every fight. But the fights you do pick, fight them clean." So I stayed in that parking lot longer than I should have, letting the cicadas fill the silence Dad had left in me. And I decided that when I walked back in, I wasn't going to fight dirty. I wasn't going to raise my voice or swing at the man who gave me half my blood. I was going to stand as who I was, nothing more and nothing less. But that moment, the sting of those words, that silence in the Legion Jamal, that's where my story really begins. I didn't sleep much that night. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale smoke, the kind you can't cover with any amount of fair freshener. I lay there on the stiff mattress, shoes still on, staring at the popcorn ceiling and listening to trucks rumble down Route 1. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Dad's voice clear as a bell. "She's nothing but a bastard." You'd think a woman my age, a general in the Marines, would be tougher, and in most ways I am. I faced down commanders who thought I didn't belong. I've had young Marines die under my watch and had to call their parents. I've stood in desert heat that warped the horizon and made rifles too hot to touch. But it's the small-town words from your own blood that can cut deeper than any battle. Lying there, I thought back to where it all began. Leach, Texas, 1970s. A duplex that rattled in the wind. A swamp cooler that barely kept the kitchen livable in July. My mom, Maggie, worked double shifts at a diner off 34th Street. She'd come home smelling of fry grease and coffee hair, pinned up shoes kicked off at the door. She was small, but she had a backbone stronger than any man I've met. Dad wasn't much around. He had his HVAC business, or at least the beginnings of one, but he was never steady. Sometimes he'd show up in a Ford pickup. Sometimes disappear for weeks. When he did come, he had a knack for turning a good day bad with a word or woe. He never once showed up for a school play or a ball game. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd earn it myself. Paper routes before dawn, folding newspapers with frozen fingers. Summers. I mowed lawns, read leaves, did whatever folks would pay a kid $2 an hour for. My friends saved up for cassette tapes and BMX bikes. I saved for a bus ticket out. At school, I kept me head down. I wasn't the smartest, but I was. Study. Teachers noticed. One of them, Mrs. Dye, wrote on a report card. Laura follows through. I didn't think much of it then, but later those words echoed. Mom did her best to shield me from Dad's worst moods, but you can't hide everything. He had a way of talking out to her like she was furniture instead of flesh and blood. I remember one night I was about 13. He looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You'll never be more than your mama." He thought it was an insult. I took it as a compliment. The summer after high school, I watched friends pack for Texas Tech or get married too young. I had no ring, no scholarship, and no patience left. One afternoon, I walked into the recruiter's office on Slide Road. The Marine sergeant behind the desk looked at me over his mustache and said, "You sure about this, miss?" I was. I signed the papers. Mom cried that night, not because she didn't want me to go, but because she knew I needed to. She told me, "Laura, you want out, earn it." So that August, I boarded a bus headed east. My suitcase was small. I had a pocket Bible from Mom and $50 in cash. Everything else I left behind. I stared out the window as the Texas plains rolled by, and I promised myself I'd never let anyone decide my worth again. Those first weeks at Paris Island were the hardest thing I'd ever done. Sand fleece heat that soaked through your bones, drill instructors in your face until you shook from head to toe. But I didn't quit. Every time my legs wanted to give out, I thought about Dad's words. Every time I doubted, I remembered Mom working nights, never once complaining. I didn't rise fast, but I rose steady. I cleaned rifles until my fingers bled. I learned to navigate by stars when the compass failed. I listened. I followed orders, and slowly, I learned to give them. Now, lying on that motel bed decades later, the air conditioner clattering in the window, I thought of all those nights Mom had stayed up sewing uniforms, counting tips, telling me I was worth more than my beginnings. I thought of the friends I'd buried, the medals tucked in a box at home, the weight of command I carried. And still one sentence from a 78-year-old man in a cheap rented suit had managed to drag me back to 13, sitting at a dinner table in Leach, Texas. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and whispered to myself, "You've earned every inch of your life, Laura. Don't let him take that." The trucks kept rolling down Route 1, and I sat in the dim light, remembering the plain facts of a hard childhood that forged me. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just remembered. The years blurred together after Paris Island, but the rhythm of the Corps never left me. Early mornings boots, laced uniform, pressed coffee, black. That steadiness carried me farther than talent or charm ever could. I spent my 20s at Camp Lund cutting my teeth as a logistics officer. While friends back home were working in oil fields or selling cars, I was learning how to move battalions across oceans. With nothing but clipboards, radios, and sheer stubbornness. Nights were long days longer. I bunked in cinderblock barracks that smelled like sweat, and pine saw shared showers with rusted drains ate chow that tasted like cardboard. But I was in. I belonged to something bigger than myself. I wasn't the kind of Marine who turned heads. I didn't have a loud laugh or a big swagger. I built a reputation for showing up, for keeping my word, for getting the job done. Promotions came slow, but they came. First lieutenant, captain, major. Each step marked not by ceremony, but by the quiet acknowledgement of Marines who said, "Ma'am, you're solid." I remember Okinawa. The humidity clung to your skin like a second shirt. We ran drills until midnight, sweat dripping, mosquitoes buzzing. I kept a fan on my desk that rattled but never cooled the room. I wrote letters home for young Marines who didn't know how to tell their parents they were lonely. I sat on CS and listened when they cried. None of that made it into evaluations, but it mattered more than any score. By my 30s, I was at Quantico training officer candidates. I wore through 3 pair soft boots pacing those fields. My voice grew horsero, barking orders. But I learned the faces of young Americans who carried every accent, every state, every story. Some quit, some rose. I learned that leadership wasn't about yelling. It was about listening, setting a standard and standing steady when storms hit. The years overseas left their mark. Desert tours where the heat warped the air until rifles burned your palms. Nights in tents where the wind howled and sand got into your teeth. I signed condolence letters by flashlight, each one a weight heavier than the last. I stood by flag-draped coffins, saluted until my arm ached and swore I would never let their names fade. And still the promotions kept coming. Colonel, Brigadier General, eventually Major General. The kind of rank that isn't supposed to happen for women. Not in the Marines, not often, but I wasn't chasing stars. I was just doing what I had always done, showing up, following through. I don't brag about medals. Most of mine sit in a box in the closet. Ribbons faded, edges bent. The real rewards came in the voices of the men and women I served with. Like Gunnery Sergeant Ortiz, grizzled and blunt, who once told me, "Ma'am, the kids watch what you do, not what you say." Or Lieutenant Chin, fresh out of school, who whispered before deployment, "General, I'll be okay if you're okay." What people don't see is the grind. The paperwork that stacks higher than rifles. The meetings that stretch late into the night. The constant reminder that lives depend on your judgment and mistakes don't get erased. The weight of command is steady, relentless, and lonely. Still, I carried it because it was mine. I earned it. And no one, not a drill instructor, not an enemy, not a politician, and certainly not my father, gave it to me. That's the Ruth I held close as I looked back on 2 decades of hard miles. From the wamps of Lund to the dust of Iraq, from Okinawa's sticky nights to Quantico's crisp mornings, I built a career brick by brick with no shortcuts. And yet, standing in that Legion jungle, hearing my father's voice cut me down to nothing more than my birth. It felt for a moment like all of it could be erased. That's the power of family. They know where the cracks are and they know how to press them. But I also knew something else. The cracks don't define you. The mortar does. The work, the years, the showing up. That's what holds a life together. And mine was solid whether my father saw it or not. The invitation had come months earlier, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with my name spelled wrong. Emma Johnson. I laughed when I opened it. That was Dad all over. Never bothered to learn the small things. Still, Aunt June called a week later and said, "Honey, it would be decent if you came, even if it's just to show your face." I didn't plan on going. 54 years had taught me that some roads weren't worth walking. But June had been the one person who never turned her back on me. She was the aunt who slipped me lunch money in high school, who drove me to the bus station when I left for Paris Island, who called every Christmas no matter where I was stationed. If she asked, I'd show up. The morning of the wedding, I was at Quantico overseeing a promotion ceremony. Blue dress uniform, shoes polished so bright you could see a reflection. 2 silver stars gleaming on the collar. Families clapped. Camera flashed. A Marine's mom hugged me so tight I could smell the starch in her blouse. When the ceremony ended, I walked back to my office, unpinned the stars, and hung the uniform in a garment bag. For a moment, I thought about leaving it there, but something told me to put it in the trunk of my Chevy. The drive to Fredericksburg was nothing new, just the endless crawl of I-95 brake lights, blinking billboards for Cracker Barrel and car dealerships. I stopped for gas at an Exxon, grabbed a black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, and kept going. By the time I pulled into the American Legion lot, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and purple. Pickup trucks, minivans, and a stretch limo Catherine must have rented were already parked outside. I didn't wear my uniform inside. Instead, I slipped on a plain navy dress and a pair of flats. Nothing fancy. I didn't want eyes on me. This was Dad's day, not mine. Let him have it. Inside the hall smelled of barbecue and cheap perfume. Plastic tablecloth stretched across rows of folding tables. A DJ set up in the corner testing speakers with a Conway Twitty track. Cousins I hadn't seen in 30 years whispered behind napkins. Some waved, some didn't. I nodded, kept moving. Catherine was radiant in a rhinestone gown that looked straight out of a department store window. She hugged me stiffly, all teeth and perfume. "Laura," she said, voice high. "So glad you made it." Her daughter Ashley stood beside her, cheeks pink from too much blush, a glass of wine already in her hand. I didn't stay long at the table. I got myself a coffee in a styrofoam cup, stirred it though there was nothing to stir, and sat in the back near the exit. That's when the toasts began. Dad stood in front of everyone. His hair slicked back, his suit baggy at the shoulders. He raised a glass of champagne and the room hushed. "Family," he began, "is what gives a man pride." My chest tightened. For 1 second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd say something kind. But then he pointed straight at me. "She's nothing but a bastard." The room froze. Fork stopped scraping. Aunt June gasped. "John, don't do this." He pressed on, voice swelling. "This here?" He pulled Ashley close. "This my real daughter. The one who carries my name." "Right." Ashley blushed and giggled like she'd been crowned prom queen. Catherine clapped her hands together, proud as a peacock. "And me?" I just sat on my coffee, told the bartender, "Water's fine, thanks," and walked outside. The parking lot was still hot from the day, cicadas buzzing from the trees. I leaned against the Malibu, staring at the garment bag in the trunk. That blue dress uniform, heavy with medals and 2 stars, hung silent inside. I'd brought it by habit, not intention. But now I wondered if maybe fate had other plans. I stayed out there longer than I meant to, listening to laughter drift through the open doors. Folks inside had decided how to handle Dad's words. Some clapped, some looked away. Most stayed quiet. Silence can weigh more than insult. Mom used to say, "Laura, you don't have to fight every fight, but the ones you pick, fight them clean." I repeated that to myself, watching fireflies flicker over the grass. Clean. Not loud, not ugly. Clean, and in that parking lot, I realized I hadn't come to that wedding just for Aunt June. Deep down, I'd come because part of me still hoped Dad would finally see me. He didn't. But maybe it was time for everyone else to. I slipped back inside after a while, trying to melt into the wallpaper. The DJ had switched to George Strait and couples were two-stepping on the linoleum floor. The air smelled like pulled pork, coleslaw, and sweet tea sweating in plastic cups. Nobody looked twice at me. Most folks were caught up in the celebration. That's when I heard Catherine's voice rise above the music. She was standing with a circle of cousins laughing loud, her hand resting on Ashley's arm. "This is my daughter Ashley," she said proudly. "She's in the Marines, stationed at Quantico, no less." The cousins oh-oh'd and odd eye widening. Ashley leaned into it, her wine glass dangling between painted nails. "It's true," she said with a grin. "Quantico is basically headquarters. I handle important stuff. Everyone there knows me." I stayed quiet, sipping water. My uniform life had taught me when to speak and when to keep still. But the truth tickled at the back of my throat. I knew Ashley's name. It had crossed my desk just last week. She was a lance corporal in admin, flagged for falsified travel receipts. Nothing career-ending if she owned up and corrected it, but serious enough that she'd need guidance. I didn't bring it up. Not at her mother's wedding. Not with everyone's eyes watching. But the contrast gnawed at me, my father holding her up as the shining star. While I was nothing but a bastard in his eyes, it walked closer, close enough to hear the details. Catherine boasted, "She'll go far. Not everyone gets posted to Quantico." Shows you the kind of talent she has. One of the cousins, old Bobby from Charlottesville, clapped Ashley on the back. "Well, good on you, girl. Carry the family name proud." Ashley grinned chin high, soaking up every drop of attention. "Oh, I will." You'll see me in stripes before long. Maybe even officer school. The room buzzed with approval. Meanwhile, I stood there, a general with 2 stars unnoticed in my plain navy dress. Aunt June shuffled over, whispering, "Laura, don't mind them. Folks don't know the half." Her eyes, soft and sad, searched mine. I just smiled thinly. "It's all right, June." But inside, something cracked. I wasn't jealous of Ashley's pride. She was young, hungry, maybe reckless, but she was still a Marine. What hurt was Dad's smugness, the way he used her as a prop to erase me. Later at the buffet table, I found myself next to Ashley. She was piling fried chicken on her plate, talking a mile a minute to a friend. She turned, ticed me, and said, "Oh, hey, you're Laura, right? Dad's first kid." I nodded. "That's right." Her friend asked, "So, are you in the Marines too?" Ashley smirked before I could answer. "Nah, she just does her own thing." Then she winked at me like we shared some private joke. I sat down, my plate untouched. "Something like that," I said quietly and walked away. Back at my table, I stirred another cup of bad coffee. Hands steady though, my chest burned. I thought of that counseling memo on my desk, the one with Ashley's name at the top. I thought of how the Corps doesn't care about family pride or wedding speeches. It cares about truth, discipline, accountability, and I thought about how Dad had called her his real daughter while dismissing me as less than nothing. I didn't blame Ashley. She was young, caught up in her mother's pride, but I knew sooner or later she'd learned what the Marine Corps demanded, and it wasn't glittering introductions at Legion Journals. It was the kind of work that left you bone-tired, steady, and scarred. I didn't want revenge on her. I didn't even want revenge on Dad. What I wanted was the truth to stand. And sometimes the only way for truth to stand is to put it in front of everyone, plain and simple. That night, as I drove back to the motel, headlights stretching down Route 3, I kept replaying the scene in my head. Catherine boasting, Dad beaming, Ashley soaking it all up. I kept seeing the garment bag in my trunk, the 2 stars gleaming on the collar. I'd chosen not to wear it. I'd chosen silence. But silence, I realized, had a cost. The parking lot was nearly empty by the time I stepped outside again. A couple of old vets leaned against the hood of a Dodge, smoking and swapping stories, their laughter drifting through the warm Virginia night. The air was thick with honeysuckle and the faint soreness of spilled beer. I walked past them, nodded, and made my way to my Chevy Malibu. I leaned against the trunk, staring at the dark outline of trees beyond the lot. I could still hear the muffled thump of music inside the hall. Somebody had put on Amarillo by morning. My father's voice echoed in my head, louder than the bass line. "She's nothing but a bastard." I opened the runk. The garment bag lay across the back zipper, glinting in the dim light. I hadn't planned to wear the uniform again that day, but now it felt like it was waiting on me, patient and heavy. I brushed my hand along the bag, and I swear I could feel the weight of every mile, every year, every grave it saluted. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over contacts. One name stared back at me. MG Samuel Ortiz Rhett. I'd served with Ortiz 20 years ago in Okinawa, and though he were retired now, he had a way of reminding me what mattered. I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. "General," he said, voice growly but warm. "Didn't expect to hear from you this late." I sighed, leaned against the car. "Sam, I'm at my father's wedding." He stood up in front of everyone and called me a bastard. Then he introduced Ashley, Ash's real daughter. Silence stretched for a beat. Then Ortiz chuckled dry as dust. "He's still the same old John, huh?" "Worse," I muttered. "What are you thinking?" Ma'am Ortiz asked. I stared at the garment bag. "I've got my blue dress uniform in the trunk. 2 stars, ribbons, everything. Part of me wants to walk back in there wearing it. Part of me thinks that's petty." Ortiz's voice steadied. "You earned that uniform, ma'am. Every stitch of it. Wearing it isn't petty. It's the truth. Don't say much. Don't raise your voice. Just be who you are. That's more than enough." I closed my eyes, breathed in the humid night air. "I don't want to humiliate anybody." "Then don't," Ortiz said simply, "but don't let a lie stand either. Your old man can shout. Your stepmother can brag. But the uniform you earned, no one can take that away. Let them see it. Let them know. We sat in silence for a while, just the buzz of cicadas filling the gap. Finally, Ortiz said, "Whatever you decide, ma'am. I know you'll do it clean." Clean, I echoed, remembering Mom's words. Thanks, Sam. After we hung up, I stood there a long time, listening to the night. A train horn blew somewhere far off, low and mournful. I unzipped the garment bag. The smell of wool and starch hit me like memory itself. Piece by piece I put Iton. Shirt crisp color tight. Medals pinned in precise rows. 2 silver stars gleaming at the shoulders. I slipped into the jacket buttoned. It slow, pulled on the polished shoes that reflected the parking lot lights. Last I checked myself in the rear view mirror. The woman staring back wasn't just Laura from Locke, daughter of Maggie, dismissed by John. She was Major General Whitaker, United States Marine Corps. I squared my shoulders, straightened my cover, and whispered to myself, "You didn't come here to win a scene. You came here to stand in the truth." With that, I shut the trunk and walked back toward the hall, every step firm, steady, clean. The hall was still buzzing when I pushed the door open. A blast of air conditioning hit me, along with a twang of a fiddle from the DJ's speakers. Folks were laughing, clinking cups, cutting cake. But when I stepped across the threshold, the sound didn't just quiet, it died. I walked in steady heels, clicking against the linoleum, Mibla dress uniform gleaming under the fluorescent lights. 2 silver stars caught every pair of eyes. You could have heard a pin drop. A cousin muttered, "Good Lord." Another whispered, "That's 2 stars, isn't it?" Chairs creaked as people turned to follow me with their eyes. Dad froze near the head table. Catherine's arm looped through his. His smile faltered, then stiffened into something colder. Ashley was mid-laugh when she saw me. At first, her eyes caught the medals, the ribbons, the cut of the jacket. Then her gaze lifted, and she saw my face. The color drained from hers. She backed up a step, hand trembling against her wine glass. "Oh my God," she stammered, voice cracking loud enough for the whole room to hear. "She is my general." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked toward the front. Every step measured. When I reached the head table, I turned to face the crowd. "I came tonight to wish my father a good life," I said, voice even calm. "I didn't come for speeches, and I didn't come for insults. I am who I am, and I worked for it." Nobody breathed. The DJ had cut the music, and even the ice machine seemed to stop humming. I turned slightly toward Ashley, who stood frozen, her cheeks still pale. "Ashley will handle any marine business at the office. Not here." Her lips parted, but no words came. She nodded once, quick and jerky, then I raised my glass of water to making things right when we can. I took a slow sip, set it down, and waited. It was Aunt June who broke the silence. "Laura, honey," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. She started clapping. One by one, others joined, hesitant at first, then louder. Vietnam vets at the back, straightened in their chairs, saluted sharp and proud. A woman from church dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Even the bartender, the kid with the bow-tie vest, stood taller behind the counter. Dad didn't clap. He just stood there, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. Catherine forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. But it didn't matter. The truth was standing plain in front of everyone, and there was no walking it back. I didn't linger. I wasn't there to gloat. I stepped away from the head table, walked through the room as the applause swelled, and headed for the door. Each handshake, each nod, each whispered, "Thank you, General," was more than enough. Outside, the cicadas were still buzzing, the night still heavy with summer air. I took a deep breath, let it out slow, and for the first time in a long time, I felt clean. The applause faded as I stepped into the night air. The music inside picked up again, someone trying to stitch the evening back together. I walked across the parking lot, the cicadas buzzing louder than the fiddle, and leaned against my Malibu. My chest felt tight, but not from shame, from release. I didn't drive off right away. People started trickling out one by one like they needed air after what they'd just witnessed. A Vietnam vet in a ball cap approached his gate, stiff from old wounds. He stuck out his hand. "Proud of you, ma'am," he said, voice rough but steady. "We needed someone like you back then." I shook his hand firmly. Thank you, and thank you for your service. Another guest, a woman I vaguely remembered from church potlucks, pressed my hand between hers. Your mama would be so proud, Laura. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and before I could answer, she turned back inside. Ashley came out next. She hesitated a long time, fidgeting with her clutch before walking toward me. Her voice was small, nothing like the brash tone she'd carried inside. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I studied her face. She was just a kid, really? 26, too much blush wine still on her breath. You don't have to know everything yet, I said evenly. But you don't need to be honest. We'll talk at Quantico. Bring your receipts. Bring the truth. You'll be fine if you're honest. She swallowed hard, nodded, and whispered, yes, ma'am. Then she hurried off into the night. Dad never came out. Not right away. Catherine followed Ashley, lips tight, eyes flashing. She didn't speak to me, just walked past, shoes clicking on the asphalt. The lot emptied until it was just me and the hum of the street lights. I sat in the driver's seat uniform, still sharp hands resting on the wheel. My phone buzzed a voicemail from Dad. I didn't listen until later. His voice was unsteady. Laura, I went too far. Shouldn't have said it. I don't know how to fix it. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, back at Quantico, I sat behind my desk with a stack of files. Ashley's memo was there, waiting exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, read it line by line, and signed it by the book. No cruelty, no favoritism, just the truth. That's what the Corps demands. Word spread fast about the wedding. Marines talk, but I didn't feed the story. I showed up to work, same as always. Inspections, meetings, young officers fumbling through their first briefs. I kept the rhythm steady because that's what leadership is, consistency, not spectacle. That weekend, I drove out to the cemetery where Mom was buried. The grass was trimmed, neat flags fluttering between rows of stones. I stood there in the morning sun, hands clasped behind my back, and told her softly, "It's done, Mama." He said his piece and I said mine, but I said it clean. The wind stirred, carrying the faint smell of honeysuckle. I stayed until the sun was high, then drove home, windows down, radio low. Months passed and life settled into its familiar rhythm again. Quantico morning staff meetings that dragged too long, late nights with paperwork stacked higher than my coffee mug. Nobody mentioned the wedding anymore, though I could still feel the way the story had traveled. Marines are a quiet network. Word finds its way through chow lines and smoke pits faster than email. But at work, they treated me the same as before. Good morning, ma'am. Crisp salutes and the kind of steady respect that comes from years, not headlines. Then came the change of command ceremony. One of our training regiments was cycling leadership, and as base commander, it was my job to preside. The day was cool, flags snapping in the breeze, brass polished to a mirror shine. Families filled the folding chairs on the parade deck, cameras, ready, kids fidgeting in Sunday best. The Marine band played sharp and precise, their notes carrying across the field. I stood at the podium, uniform perfect, ribbons, lined like a ledger of years, lived hard. I said the usual words, clean and simple recognition of the outgoing commander. Welcome for the incoming. Nothing flowery, just truth. Marines don't need speeches, they need steadiness. After the ceremony, I stepped down to greet families. A line formed, handshakes, photographs, polite thanks. And there, near the back, I saw him. Dad, sports coat a size too big. Tie, crooked hair, thinner than I remembered. He didn't bring Catherine. He didn't bring Ashley. He stood alone, hands shoved into his pockets, waiting his turn like any other guest. When he reached me, he didn't smirk or puff his chest. He didn't crack a joke to cover nerves. He just stuck out his hand and said loud enough for those around to hear, my daughter, General Emma Johnson. Not bastard, not nothing. Mid-otter. The words were plain, almost awkward, but they were real, and they settled somewhere deep, heavier than his insult had ever been. Aunt June was there, too, tears in her eyes. She hugged us both, whispering, about time. How about time? I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded, shook his hand and said, thank you. Then has stepped aside, letting the next family through. No reconciliation storybook ending, no warm embrace, Just a small steady correction spoken in public. And that was enough. That evening, I drove home with the windows rolled down, I-95 humming beneath my tires. A Whataburger cup rattled in the console, the taste of sweet tea lingering. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something like peace. Here's what I learned. Blood isn't about who shouts the loudest at a wedding toast. Blood is about who shows up even late, even clumsy, but honest. And dignity, it doesn't need a crowd. But sometimes a crowd needs to see dignity so they'll remember it when it's their turn. If you've listened this far, maybe you've carried your own insults, words meant to reduce you to nothing. Don't let them stick. Stand in your truth clean and steady. And if this story touched you, share it. Pass it along because someone else out there needs to know they're not alone. That they're worth more than the worst thing ever said about them. Thank you for staying with me. If you'd like to hear more stories like this about the quiet strength we carry and the reckonings life brings, I hope you'll subscribe or share this with someone who needs it today.